Hi, everyone. This is Donna White.
I'm Chuck Scott.
And in our efforts to produce something that could potentially provide continuing education credit for RMACAC members, we are recording what we would normally have presented at the RMACAC conference this April. So this is navigating the Federal Service Academy application process. And it isn't an info brief about the service academies. It's really a presentation that will give you the tools to be able to advise your students and their parents about the process. So it's titled Strategies for Counselors for a Reason.
And one of the things that I think is really hopefully helpful to counselors out there is that if you have questions after the presentation, you go through it and you come up with questions, I think I can speak for Donna and I that we're more than willing to help you answer questions, talk about the process, give you little tidbits that we've learned. Certainly with Donna being an Academy graduate, she has firsthand knowledge, and being an admissions officer at West Point. I've been in the director for the Service Academy Prep Program at New Mexico Military Institute for about 5 years now. So I think we both come from some very interesting perceptions and experiences.
So here are our objectives. So we will talk a little bit about ourselves, and Chuck already kind of gave you an advance on me, and he'll explain his military service also, but we'll give you an overview of the service academies, the application process, and then strategies and resources. Okay. So I'm Donna White. I work at Albuquerque Academy. I am a retired Army officer. I am a West Point grad. I am the Military Academy Liaison Officer for House District 1 here in the state of New Mexico. I'm oftentimes the state coordinator because the real state coordinator is actually camping around the 50 United States because he retired from his day job. So am heavily involved in what is going on at West Point, but I'm also a part of a diversity and inclusion committee dealing with admissions at West Point. And so that is really looking more broadly than just West Point, but about issues pertaining to diversity and inclusion when we're doing outreach with Academy hopefuls. Go ahead, Chuck.
I'm Chuck Scott. As I said, I'm the director of the Service Academy Prep Program at New Mexico Military Institute down in Roswell. I'm a retired senior chief petty officer, spent 27 years on active duty and in the reserves. Currently serve as a Navy Blue and Gold officer for primarily kids on campus down here in Roswell, but also in the surrounding area, and have been an Air Force liaison officer in the same role, working with kids that are applying to the Air Force Academy, and have been doing that for about 2 years now, overall about 5.
So our federal service academies, they are, let me move this a little bit. They're the Air Force Academy, the Merchant Marine Academy, the Coast Guard Academy, United States Military Academy, and United States Naval Academy. These are your 5 federal service academies. A lot of people are really only familiar with what we call the big 3, Air Force, Army, and Navy, but we have 2 other really excellent options out in America that kids can take advantage of, and we'll talk a little bit about those differences or the unique aspects of all of them as we go along. So one of the things we want to make sure you and your students are aware of is that it's very, very nice that a service academy education does not cost a kid money, but there is a military service obligation at the end of that 4-year college experience. And it varies a little bit if a graduate goes on to, say, flight school, but the general commitment after graduation is 5 years of active duty and 3 years in a reserve status. The Merchant Marine students go into 8 years of Naval Reserve. They can go immediately after they graduate to their subsequent training and commission as a ship captain. But they do have 8 years in the Naval Reserve. And a key point that we want to put out to you is students don't take on that service obligation until they start their first class of their junior year. So they could go to a service academy for 2 years and check it out and not have a service obligation.
One thing about the Merchant Marine Academy is it's used in more of a kind of a option B for a lot of kids applying to one of the other service academies, because a student going through the Merchant Marine program, when they graduate with their bachelor's degree, they can enter into any of the branches of the armed forces: Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, Coast Guard. So they can choose at that point which way they want to go. They would still have the 5 years active duty, 3-year reserve status, or they can go with a civilian side, they would go into commercial shipping, harbor management, port management, things like that, security. And they can go into any reserve component. It doesn't have to be the Navy. It can be in any reserve component in the United States.
Okay, so we want to make clear that the service academies are highly selective institutions of higher learning. So this data comes from the class of 2021. So those are the students that will not be graduating this summer, but next summer. And you see the statistics. You see that we're under 15% accept rate at all 5 of the service academies. And so the thought that these are not looking holistically and digging for the best and the brightest, that is an erroneous thought. These are highly competitive programs that your students need to be prepared for, and they need to have taken, and we'll get to it a little bit later, the most challenging curriculum that will prepare them for a very demanding program of study when they're at a service academy.
And you'll look at the accepted and enrolled, and you'll notice it's a fairly significant difference, 800 some between the two. The difference comes from the fact, for instance, I had one young man this year, high school senior, had applied to Air Force, Navy, and West Point. He was offered both Air Force and Navy, decided to go Air Force. So he would be counted in that overall accepted but not enrolled at the Naval Academy. And not only that, but you'll have kids that may report for I-Day, R-Day, and they go through a brief physical. If they're found to have an illness, they might be sent home, might be sent to a prep school. So that's where you see that difference between the 4,800 and the 4,000 accepted and enrolled number.
But it's interesting to note that that is not a high percentage of students who decline their offer of admission, their appointment, if they've been proffered it. So it is the students that go through the process generally tend to want it badly. Okay. This is the algorithm for how a student gets evaluated by the service academies. You see that the academic portion of that is 60% of the overall algorithm. 30% is leadership, athletics, community service, those types of things. And the candidate fitness assessment or the physical fitness evaluation is 10% of that. So that's your formula for evaluating a student and the process of being competitive for admission.
When you look at the academic, the 60%, so the start point, the gate is really the 3.0 cumulative, ACT over 26 or SAT over 1200. Obviously, you want to have it as high as you can get. So your students are encouraged to take the ACT, take the SAT, because the academies will also super score. So they can do well in English on one, do well in math on the other. But they want to make sure that that's kind of the 26, 1200 are more or less starting blocks. They want to get higher. Now, if down in the 30% of leadership, community service, and athletics, if they have a special talent, a 2.8 could get them into an academy. It depends on what the academy is trying to do with their incoming class. They may need a volleyball player or a football player or a basketball player or first trumpet. It just depends. So that's one of the things when we get to the application, that they want to make sure that they're covering everything that they do, all the activities, all the things that they've done, because you never know what an academy is looking for in terms of a talent to come into the pool. But those are good starting points.
But if a junior or if a sophomore comes to you and says, what should I be focusing on? It is very, very clear from this formula that the focus that you would want to put a kid toward would be their academic performance.
Yeah, a lot of kids and a lot of parents. You will have to deal with parents. A lot of the parents think there's a magic bullet. What can I do? What can my son or daughter do to get them in an academy? And there's really no magic bullet. Like Donna said, academics is first. And when General Kelly, who's the president of the Falcon Foundation, when he visits my campus in the fall, he will tell the sponsored kids and the self-preps, as we call them, academics will get you into an academy. That's pretty much the overall emphasis, because they have to perform well academically.
Okay, so we're going into a little bit more detail on that 60-30-40, 60-30-10, sorry. So here we go. I'm gonna let you absorb that. The element of high school rank is a bit of a shifting kind of norm at this point. West Point is doing away with high school rank as a part of their 60% because there are so many schools that don't rank. And it's really hard to be able to have an apple to apple comparison when you're talking a kid from New Mexico versus a kid from Illinois. So the schools are going to go away from that, or at least I know one of the service academies has, but you can take a look. And the whole idea here academically is for a student to take the most rigorous program of instruction possible and do well in it. And then you see the elements of the athletics, community service, and leadership. And the general idea there would be for a student to not just be a member of a club or but to take on a leadership role. And then you see that the candidate fitness assessment, it's a 6-element test for 4 of the service academies, and it's a 3-element test for the Coast Guard Academy. This is the kind of thing where if a sophomore does come in and say, what can I do to get prepared? You could say, start practicing that candidate fitness assessment, because those 6 events have to be done in about a 30-minute, 35-minute period. And if they practice one of them at a time, they don't get the sense of what it feels like to go through the whole thing. And I think Chuck and I have both had to administer it. And there have been a few times that I have been cleaning up vomit after from the 1 mile run because kids didn't go through the entire 5 previous events before they started running. So sorry, didn't mean to be a little off color, but that's the truth.
And one of the things, when you look down at component number 2, pull-ups and flexed arm hang, females can choose to do the flexed arm hang. However, if they can do 1 pull-up versus 30 seconds, 35 seconds, 40 seconds on a flexed arm hang, it's much better. So females, if they can practice pull-ups, get to where they can do at least 1, 2 pull-ups, are going to be ahead of the game in regards to the candidate fitness assessment.
That is so true. All right, take a look. Here is your high school curriculum, the recommendations. Note, they take a look at 4 years of high school work. Freshman year counts. So it isn't a freebie. Students need to be doing well for 4 years. This
What
is,
they want to see, I'm sorry.
no, go ahead.
What they want to see is they want to see continued improvement. They don't want to see a student get C's, B's freshman year and then level off. They want to see continued improvement. They want to see rigorous classes. I know that one of the things that I talk to my the high school kids here at the Institute about is you want to get into chemistry and physics minimum, and you want to get to pre-calculus or calculus. Those are the math and science are extremely important. A lot of the others, well, English is pretty much a set. Social science is pretty well set, foreign language, and it depends on the technology, not necessarily a deal breaker. They like to see some kind of technology because obviously it's in play everywhere, but they like to see a very strong schedule continually, not taking it easy your senior year or second half of junior year or whatever. And the academies will watch that second half of the senior year. If a student has an appointment, just because they have the appointment doesn't mean it could be taken away if they don't perform to the same level coming out of their senior year as they did going in. So that's something that kids have to go all the way to the end.
Right. Okay. There are some legal requirements to be eligible for a service academy. So I'm going to just flash this up here, and we're not really going to talk too much to it because some of what we need to expand upon is in later slides. But given that you'll be able to take a look at this, and if any of you want this, we will be happy to email it to you so you can take all the time you want on a single slide. But here are the basic legal requirements. So 17 to 22 is a non-negotiable. If you cannot be older than 22 on the 1st of July of the year that you are going into a service academy. But that's a pretty wide range there. A kid can go to college, a kid could take a gap year and still make the decision to go to a service academy. And then you see that at Merchant Marine, it's a little bit older. Okay. There you go. We're just going to keep going. All right. I wanted to have all of you think a little bit broadly about your kids. So you take a look at these 3 humans that are on the screen, and I don't know, what do you think? Could they actually be people who have gone to a service academy? Actually, one of those glamorous girls there, she got commissioned 2 years ago, and the girl who's saluting her got commissioned a year ago. So they are now all second lieutenants in the United States Army. That young man, there you go. He got commissioned quite a few years ago. So this young man was a state champion baseball player. Then he's playing paintball, and he happens to be in his basic course as we speak. Coronavirus has stymied him a little bit. He thought that he would be going to some other schools. He's actually doing a lot of office work that he hates. Oh well. There you go. Graduation day for this young lady. And this is her in front of an airframe, and she is now a pilot in the Navy. She is, once again, this is her still as a cadet, but still a pilot in the Navy. This young man, interesting little headgear right there. He is a pilot in the Air Force. And so they have a variety of personalities, and I would have you think broadly about the students that you're considering. And it doesn't need to be just the kids who are in ROTC at your school. These are kids that have demonstrated leadership and could potentially be very, very valuable in leading the soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines that are out in the United States. All right. Postgraduate options. So Chuck is going to take you through those.
So the postgraduate options for kids at the service academies are quite broad. We talked a little bit about the Merchant Marine Academy. Graduates can serve as licensed merchant mariners for civilian lines with the requirement for reserve duty. They can also go Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, Coast Guard, serve as officers, and for the 5 active duty and 3-year reserve. Military Academy West Point grads will serve in either combat arms or combat support. And I won't go through each one of those, but again, a broad range of specialties that West Point graduates can do. For United States Air Force graduates, about 60% of those kids, when they graduate, will serve in flight operations. They're going to be pilots, they're going to be radar officers or weapons officers or navigators. Then one of the things that the Air Force has done the last couple of years is to get to that number of pilot slots that they want. They have actually limited some of the majors for graduation, some in the business, the management, things like that. And it's going to differ year to year based on the needs of big Air Force. The United States Naval Academy, their graduates will serve either surface, submarine, special warfare, aviation, medical units, or naval graduates can also go into the United States Marine Corps as second lieutenants. And the U.S. Coast Guard has basically 3 sections that kids will go into: the cutter force, the boat forces, or aviation. And if a student is looking to be a pilot, the Coast Guard and Merchant Marine have a little bit, I won't say easier because it's not easier, but they have a little bit broader acceptance rate. And Coast Guard actually has more aviation assets percentage-wise than the Air Force. So these are the things that kids can do once they graduate from a service academy. It also prepares them well for what's beyond military service.
I want to make a distinction, though. The Coast Guard Academy, the Coast Guard is not under the Department of Defense for its administration. It is the Department of Homeland Security. And did I get that right, Chuck?
Yeah.
Yeah. And which theoretically means that it isn't a fighting force per se. Now, because it is patrolling our nation's waterways and our nation's water borders, we know that there are incidences where there are bullets flying, but by and large, it is not a combatant force, unlike the Naval Academy and the Navy, the Air Force, the Army, the Marines. So that's a little bit of a distinction. And so if you're dealing with your kids or their parents and they're worried about the direct combat probability, the Coast Guard could be the option that might be more palatable for some of your kids or their parents. Okay, there we go. So one of the things that 4 of the service academies require is a nomination. And every single student in the United States of America is eligible for 4 nominations. So you see, 1 from each U.S. Senator in their home state, that's 2. 1 from the House District Congressperson, that adds up to 3. And then 1 from the Vice President of the United States, so that's the 4. And then, in addition to that, students who are have parents who've retired, might have a disabled veteran for a parent, they are in a ROTC unit or a JROTC unit that's honors, or a student that has enlisted in the military, that is another source of a nomination. So the application process for those nominations, we're going to go through as we follow. The Coast Guard Academy does not require a congressional nomination. So Merchant Marine, Army, Navy, Air Force require a congressional nomination. Coast Guard does not.
You see the application for congressional nominations on the senators and representative websites. Now's the time for students to be looking at those because they're going to be opening. Some have already opened, and they want to make sure they're paying attention to what's required. It's kind of an Easter egg hunt when they get into that site because some congressmen, congresswomen, senators will have those links listed in different places on their sites. So it's just a matter of finding it and then setting up a matrix to go, what do I need to submit? Because a lot of things that they'll submit for a congressional nomination are the same things they're going to need for an Academy application.
Right. Okay. So as Chuck said, it's super easy to do. You can, in a browser, you can put UDOL for New Mexico, and UDOL's site will come up, and then you have to noodle around a little bit to find constituent services or how can I help you or whatever. And the Service Academy application, the Service Academy nomination process will be there, and you end up having to complete all of the documents, and you have to take a look at the deadlines because the congressional offices are militant about if you don't have your materials in by 5 p.m. on whatever is the Friday that they have stated, they do not consider you because they figure you can just wait for another year if you really want it. If you get all of your materials in by the deadline, most and are deemed to be admissible, a competitive candidate, they will contact you and they will set up an interview date for you that the congressional leaders conduct. Normally it's not done by the congressperson themselves. It is done by some panels of individuals in the community, but they will schedule that, and it's usually done in the November timeframe of the year that a student is seeking admission. So this little piece right here, congressional leader has 5 seats at each academy. So Senator Udall has 5 seats at Army. And if he has had a cadet go in every single year, then he is dealing with 1 vacancy because that isn't encumbered by a senior, a junior, a sophomore, or a freshman. If he had a student leave who would have been a sophomore, he may be dealing with 2 seats that he can fill. And for every vacancy that these congressional leaders have, they can put 10 constituent names against that vacancy. And then those 10 constituents are competing against each other for that vacancy. And so we go back to a few slides back, the whole candidate score. The higher the whole candidate score, the better a constituent's competitiveness is to land that vacancy. Anything else on that one, Chuck?
The only thing I was thinking of, and it's really, most of the time I've seen your representatives, their applications will be hard copy. The kids, the candidates print them out, fill them out, they get their letters together, and then they mail them in. Most of your senatorial pages tend to be online submissions where your letter writer will get a link, they'll upload the letter. So make sure you're paying attention to that. Make sure the students are paying attention to that, because one of the things that I haven't said when we started was the student needs to own this. It needs to be their process, not yours, not their mom and dad's, not uncles, not aunts. It's got to be their process. They have to own it. But just be very cognizant of websites, instructions, things like that.
Okay. So we talked about the nomination process, and a parallel process to seeking a nomination is to apply to the service academies. And those portals, actually, if you've got a kid who is a junior, they can go in and report, even if they haven't taken the standardized testing yet, and we have that listed here, they can go in and fill out what is called a pre-candidate questionnaire. It's in advance of actually doing the full up application. And that opens up a file for them, and the service academies will start communicating with them directly about what next. And they will prompt them for additional materials and actually say, all right, you opened up a preliminary application. Would you like to now follow up and turn that into an actual application? So late fall and early spring of junior year, that pre-application, do it with PSAT scores. Unfortunately, this past summer, the summer programs that juniors had applied to in January, every single service academy had to cancel because of the coronavirus issues. The SAT or an ACT, they're going to have to sit for. There's a lot of schools going test optional. I don't see the service academies doing that. And so students are going to have to get themselves into a place where they can take the SAT or the ACT, and they need to send it to the service academies and the congressional offices. And this is one of those things where when the kids are in their account for the SAT or the ACT, when it's the send scores option, they need to be plugging in the name of Senator Udall, and up will load the 4-digit code to have Senator Udall receive the kids' scores. The Senate and congressional offices require those scores to be sent from the testing agencies. So it's just an additional item. So required application materials that Chuck talked about, the activities, transcripts, teacher recs. The service academies vary across the board for how many teacher recs and which ones they are. And so the student needs to get some advanced work done to see what those are, which teachers they need a rec from. The interviews are a part that gets scheduled once a student has gotten far enough along in the application process that the service academy goes, okay, this kid is serious and this kid is competitive. They'll schedule the student for an interview. This piece right here, the DOD-MERB medical exam. The reason that Chuck and I will tell most kids, if they're interested in a service academy, to get their file complete as early as they can, or at least make progress and get the preponderance of the documents in, is that this medical exam can take a long time to complete. And if a kid has a minor issue that happened in their childhood, they had to have a knee surgery when they were a sophomore, there may be follow-up medical documents that have to go to this agency that will then help them determine the health or not physical fitness level of a candidate. And then you see this last one, practice the CFA or the PFE.
Yeah. One thing going back to DOD-MERB that's very, very important, make sure the student is reading the instructions carefully. I was working with a young man this last year, went in, quickly filled it out. He answered a couple of the questions. Have you had this? Have you had asthma? And he thought of the family, a family history. There was some asthma in the family. He answered yes. Remarkably, he ended up getting an appointment to the United States Air Force Academy, but it took him forever to get that straightened out, because once a red flag goes up with DOD-MERB, it's going to take a lot of work on the candidate's part. So make sure they're reading the DOD-MERB instructions very, very carefully. DOD-MERB will not talk to anybody but the candidate, and have them save everything that they submit. That's one thing that I've learned over the last couple of years. Make sure they're paying really, really close attention once they get to that DOD-MERB physical.
Now, we probably ought to expand our slide on this particular element. Let me tell you how the DOD-MERB medical exam happens. It is the DOD-MERB reaches out to the applicant in an electronic communication to tell the applicant that you have to schedule your medical exam at a sanctioned DOD-MERB facility, a contracted facility in the community. It isn't done by a student's private physician. It's done by a contracted facility, and the student fills out the medical history, and then reports to the contracted facility to have the medical exam done by this contracted agent. So it gets triggered by how much is completed on the student's application, and then it is sent to the student in an electronic communication to start that medical exam process going. Okay. That's mystified a few students. Okay, application strategies. Do you see that red word? Early. Yep, that's why we put it in red. And then Chuck already said, patience, endurance, keep copies. We've talked a little bit about some of the disqualifications. I will tell you that one of the things that students get tripped up by will be ADHD. And I will tell you right now, the service academies they ask a specific question. Have you taken the standardized test with extended time? And if you answer yes, that is one of the elements that could get you disqualified from a service academy. Just telling you that, okay? All right. Counselor resources. In every community, there is the service academy rep, me, the military academy liaison officer here in the greater Albuquerque area. Each of the service academies has a rep in the state or in the community who provides the liaison with the community about things pertaining to the service academy. You can look at the website and you can take a look and see who regionally, the person who is residing up at the service academy, but who has the geographical responsibility for your region, and you can reach out and touch that person. The Southwest Regional Coordinator Admissions Officer at West Point right now is a student who is from Albuquerque. So that's a student. A young man who was a student in Albuquerque, went to West Point, has been in the Army for 8 years, and just arrived back at West Point to work admissions actions. So so those are the field force, the liaisons. You can obviously get a lot of information off websites. These service academies do fly-ins. You can go visit the service academies. And if you are a senior who is admissible, you can do an overnight. If you're a junior, you just do a day trip. The congressional offices will do information sessions in your community. We actually 2 weeks ago just had a series of virtual meetings, and each of the service academies got the opportunity to give their specifics about their academy. And then there's also alums and parent groups that are in local communities. I mentioned the summer immersion programs. They didn't happen this year. They happen every other year. So, and to be honest, those are they're very competitive to get a spot into these summer programs. So the deadlines for applications, the application generally opens up in the December timeframe and will close usually by the end of January, middle of February. And so those are options that students have to be able to go see what the service academy's like before they actually decide whether or not they want to go through the real painful process of applying. And it's not painful, it's just time consuming, and it requires some diligence and persistence.
And one of the things, if a student is interested in applying to, say, West Point Summer Leadership Program, have them apply to all of them. Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard. Merchant Marine does not have a summer program. They don't have the staff. But apply to all of them because, as Donna said, it's a very competitive process, and you don't know. And just because you go to Air Force summer program doesn't mean the student won't get an offer from West Point or Navy or Coast Guard. So it gives them a little bit of a taste of what they're getting into, which is extremely important. We've had students that go through the process, actually go to an academy, and then they're there and all of a sudden it's like, no, I don't think so. Not often, but it does happen.
Okay, Chuck's going to deal with these because this is his wheelhouse.
Yeah, so a lot of times what happens, people get confused. They've heard of prep schools. They think there's a separate application. But when a student applies to any of the academies, the options are a direct appointment. They can get a prep school offer, and prep school would be Army, Navy, Air Force. They have organized prep schools. Merchant Marine has a prep program, and Coast Guard has a prep program. But they're considered, applicants are considered for those as well as a direct appointment. So, and there's no separate application. Else they do, it's an automatic consideration if they're not admissible directly. So that would be Army and Air Force are on site, and Colorado Springs and in West Point. Newport, Rhode Island is for the Naval Academy. Coast Guard also sends a few of their cadets to NAPS as preps. Another route, actually there's kind of a two-track thing. So I have civilian prep schools on the slide here. We happen to be a civilian prep school. We will receive kids from Army, Navy, Air Force, and Merchant Marine. They come here as what they call sponsored preps. They come to us for a year. They're in a very set program. If they do what they need to do based on what I call the contract with the academy, they go, they get their appointment. We can also bring kids in as what we call self-preps. So if a student was not fortunate enough to get a direct or a prep school or a civilian prep program offer, they can attend, say, New Mexico Military Institute as a self-prep student. The way I look at it is I treat them the same way, put them in the same classes as a sponsored prep, try to get them to a competitive level, and then also introduce them to alternative programs. Because one of the things that you want to encourage those kids to do is not only apply to Air Force, but apply to Air Force ROTC, to Army ROTC, Air Force ROTC, or Navy, I'm sorry. So I bring in those people to talk about the alternative programs. The platoon leader course for the Marine Corps will generally always have a couple of kids contract through PLC with the Marine Corps out of the institute here, and they go on to serve as commissioned officers in the Marine Corps. But these are some of the schools. They can enroll in a civilian school. They can go to a 2-year school or a 4-year school. And as long as they're taking a competitive program, they can be competitive for an appointment. And lastly, they can enlist, because all of the academies or all the service branches really look to their enlisted soldiers, sailors, Air Force, or Marine airmen as potential academy students. So just because a student goes and enlists in the Air Force doesn't mean that they've given up on the Air Force Academy. They can work with their ALOs and receive an appointment to the Air Force Academy. So there's a lot of different options. And I'm happy to talk to anybody anytime, students, parents, counselors, about this process in further detail.
All right, so this is our chance to give you some of the tricks of the trade that we've discovered. The admissions officers for the service academies, that's going to be the person that will take your student's file to admissions committee. And your students or you should be reaching out to them if you've got questions. Same as you would help students with their application to any college, you want them to put their best self forward. And there are essays for the service academies, there are essays for the nominations. Have your kids get them to you for review. If your students can, and in this case, in these days, it's going to be interesting with limitations on on-campus visits. The service academies are a little different lifestyles, so we'll see how they're going to go about doing that this particular year, the 2020 to 2021 application cycle. But getting on and taking a look, getting your feet on the ground is going to be pretty important. Okay.
And one thing too, when the students start looking at applying, have them ask questions. They really need to understand what they're getting into. As Donna said quite a while ago, a lot of parents especially will look at this going, oh, it's a free education. It's not free. There's a service commitment, and they need to understand what they're getting into. They really do.
So we go back to those legal requirements and the fact that a student can be as old as 22. It is perfectly acceptable. And in fact, at most of the service academies, around 25% of the students that enter any given year had tried previously to get an appointment and to enroll and were unsuccessful. And so that type of persistence and determination pays off. And there is an extended period of time that a student can delay or be doing other work that's targeted towards the Service Academy academic program and still get in. There are around 20 students each year from the Service Academies that can go to med school. So if a student is hoping to go on to med school, that is an option through the Service Academies, but literally only 20 students, 2% of the graduating class at West Point, can go to med school. It's capped by congressional decree. Students, military officers are routinely found to be very respected, and they are sought after because of the leadership that they take on at a very young age in private business. So pretty good options once a student is on the back end into their adult years. All right. This is our contact info. We are happy to email you this presentation or answer any questions you may have. We want to share the information to give you the tools to be able to help your students or their parents know what this process is all about. So please reach out to us.
Yeah, it's a complicated, not terribly complicated. It's just a lot of moving parts when they start looking at the application for an academy. And most of the time, I think I see kids applying to multiple academies. It just increases their chances. Then you have the nomination piece. So there's a lot of moving parts in this process, not terribly complex, but somebody who's never done it before, we're happy to be sounding boards or offer advice or information anytime. So please distribute my information freely. Happy to talk to anybody anytime.
Same here. Thanks, folks.
Thank you.